Welcome to the Final Score Network and the Final Score Podcast, presented by Team Anders Realtors. I'm Andy. He's former NCAA student athlete and co-host.
Ryan, jam, two-hand monster flush off the inbound. Ryan, Cam, slam, jam.
Subscribe to us on Podbean, the Apple Podcast Store, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at TheFinalScore35 and TikTok at AGSpartanFan35. Oh, and one more note before we get started.
I'd like to apologize to anyone I've not offended yet. Please be patient. I'll get to you shortly.
Welcome into podcast number 167. Yes, if you're tuned in that closely, you can tell. It's back to Andy leading the pod. Ryan is upstairs hacking up a lung, sick. I was traveling Monday through Wednesday, so we're a little bit late to the game this weekend, but just in time for the Sweet 16, which starts in about 7 minutes. Obviously, we've got lots of basketball to talk about. For some reason, Major League Baseball season started already. It's not even April. We've got gambling scandals. We've got transfer portal wide open. We've got tons of mailbag. We got a lot to cover. I'm flying solo. I've got a couple of pieces of feedback from Ryan to weigh in, so let's get to it. Welcome to the 167th edition of the TFS pod. All right. Podium-wise, I think last week we kind of covered off golf a little bit in our podiums and as kind of a way of coverage, and we went region by region. Back to the normal 4 spots this week. Obviously very NCAA tournament heavy, but just a real brief podium for me, and I probably could go back to the last 3 March, Aprils and have the same podium around this time of the year, and is why has baseball started already? I believe the first games were actually last week, maybe in Korea. Good news is the Tigers won today, 1-0. I think they threw a 3-hitter or something similar to that. So open up on the road in Chicago. You know, things are looking up. Hopefully the Tigers will be worth watching and worth talking about this year. But again, why? Why is baseball 162 games? Why does it start in March now? Why does it go until November? The season is too long. The weather is crappy in the northern half of the United States, as evidenced by the fact that it's been anywhere from 70 to snow in the last week here in Michigan. It's just, you end up playing more doubleheaders in the summer anyway. Again, I go back to cut the season by 22 games, cut it to 140. Nobody would skip a beat. You want to extend the playoffs as a result? Go for it. 162 games is too many. People, except for diehard baseball fans, just don't care. Yes, they've made improvements lately to make the game better. Awesome. Get it. That's great. I still haven't watched a full Major League Baseball game in years. It's too much. It's too much of a game. It's too much of a season. You got hockey playoffs getting ready to ramp up now. You've got basketball playoffs if you care about the NBA, which of course we don't. You've got March Madness. You've got the first major coming out. You had the unofficial 5th major already. Like, don't take away from those sports. Or, on the other hand, take away from baseball by having it play against all those other sports. There's no need to start it now. Like I say every year, I'm sure you can go back and find in the pod, don't start baseball until at least May. Thank you. All right, for the tee-up this week, we did not, I don't believe, do a tee-up last week, but we'll go back to the tee-up. And I admit I did not listen to the press conference. I have not read a whole ton on this. Again, not a huge baseball guy, but it definitely got my radar up. With the Ohtani gambling smoke that's going on. I believe if I have this correct, he's claiming it's not him, that it was his translator who stole a bunch of stuff, who's accused of gambling. This would be like Ohtani's a modern day Babe Ruth, an amazing pitcher who's also an amazing hitter and a power hitter at that. He signed a mega contract, deferred a lot of it. Took a big risk by doing so, but deferred a lot of it. Already off to a good start. Probably what I've seen at a glance with the Dodgers just today. I think he got on base 3 times. I guess the tee-up is, if there's smoke, there's probably fire. And if there's smoke and they don't do anything with that fire, then let Pete Rose back into baseball history and put him in the Hall of Fame. Because you cannot punish Pete Rose for doing what exactly it is purported that Ohtani might have done. Not saying he did, but his handler or translator certainly seems to have done. If there's a correlation and any proof, and Rod Manfred said it might be a lengthy process to kind of prove this out. If he did it and you let him keep playing, then you better unban Pete Rose. That's what I'm going to say about that. All right, first quarter is presented by Norris Sports Group. NSG is a boutique agency of experts with 30 plus years of experience in sports sponsorship and much more. Learn more about them today at norrissportsgroup.com. All right, let's go around the tournament a little bit. First, I'll give you a little bit of a live look before the Sweet 16 starts tonight at the TFS podcast contest. Got Mr. Dave Daub 3 in the lead with a smoking 40 correct so far out of the first weekend. I believe that's out of 48, so that's a pretty hefty start. Right on his, and he's got Houston winning it. Right on his heels is Mr. Polo with Purdue, 38 right, 50 total points so far. Then you got another Dave Daub bracket with Houston. That was a risky one, given what happened in the last game of the second round. I'm in there tied for third, but it was with my second bracket where I picked Auburn, who got beat in the first round. You got to love it when the cheaters go out early. I got to say that. Ms. Rachel Gam is tied for fifth. She's got UNC and is alive. You got Chris, longtime listener. He's got Houston. He's tied for fifth. You got Ryan, my cohort. He's tied for fifth. He's got UConn. Further down the way, my actual picks that I went through last week are sitting 27th with 32 correct, but I still have a possible 166 in my entire Final Four correct. So let's talk about that a little bit. We'll kind of do a quick blow-by-blow of the bracket as it was and then what's going forward. So dating back, you had UConn, Stetson, Yawner, not even close. Northwestern, Florida Atlantic, phenomenal first-round game, typical 8-9 battle. Northwestern, both teams kind of clawed in the first half. Northwestern had a lead, kind of a questionable call. Florida Atlantic shot back into the game, had a chance to win it, did not after Northwestern tied it, and then Northwestern just flat out dominated them in overtime. Phenomenal win for Northwestern. San Diego State looked dominant against UAB. That was a no-brainer. That sets up a rematch, I believe, I don't know if it's tonight or tomorrow, of last year's Final Four game, or last year's title game, with UConn. First big upset, really, if you look bracket-wise, was Yale over Auburn. That was a heck of a game. A little bit of controversy if you ask Auburn fans. They got a guy that was kicked out for retaliation, a flagrant 2. You're probably the guy who retaliates is going to get busted, so not really sure why he did it. I had Auburn getting to the Sweet 16, but honestly was more than happy to see them lose. Not a big Bruce Pearl fan, and that knocks out one of those Ken Palm 8 teams that had a viable chance to win it. Moving down, you had another big upset. Duquesne really was all over BYU in a dominant game. That was kind of fun to watch. A lot of people struggled to pronounce that. So you had 2 upsets in what I thought might be the most chalky bracket. Illinois was dominant against Morehead State. I think Drake was everybody's pick to win here and be one of the upsets of the bracket, as much as a 10 over a 7 is an upset, and that did not happen. Washington State had a really nice game. Knocked off Drake. Drake had kind of the lead for a lot of the game and just kind of fizzled late. Struggled at the free throw line. The Cyclones looked really good. Marched into the second round, staying there in the East. UConn just dominated Northwestern. Northwestern did not give up. Northwestern fought hard. And yes, by the way, I watched pieces and parts of all but probably San Diego State Yale. That's probably the only game all weekend that I did not watch. And the reason is because it's on so damn late on a Sunday night. Like, hello, put these games, don't stagger them with single games early in the afternoon and then stagger them at night. On Sunday, stagger them in the afternoon and have single games at night and have them done by 10. Like, somebody like me literally watched basketball from noon until past 12 o'clock midnight, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I couldn't do it on Sunday. I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to travel. It's a missed opportunity. But anyway, San Diego State got the nice win there, set up an easy win there, set up that title game rematch with UConn. I had BYU playing Illinois. Obviously, ended up being Duquesne. Illinois was all over Duquesne into that run. Illinois has looked really good, a continuation from their Big Ten tournament championship. Iowa State, it was a little bit of a battle with Washington State, but it ultimately prevailed. And Iowa State takes on Illinois. So we'll get to the Sweet 16 in a minute. I'll work my way around. We'll go down to the West. North Carolina had really no problem in their game against Wagner. Michigan State had no problem at all in the Mississippi State game, and in fact looked pretty fantastic. Gave Michigan State fans hope, and it made me think, my pick to get Michigan State, slide in maybe the Elite Eight and match up really well with North Carolina. That's looking really good right now. Probably the best all-around game Michigan State played all year. Really, really solid defense, very cohesive and aggressive on defense, caused turnovers, got runouts, had great guard play. Was just a really promising game. Mady Sissoko kind of continued on his little streak that he'd been playing on. Things were looking good. We'll get back to what happened in the next round next. St. Mary's gets picked off by Grand Canyon, another good upset, but the typical 5-12. There's always 5-12 upsets, and there were another couple this year. GCU was kind of a fun, scrappy team to watch. Alabama took out Charleston in what was a close game for a while. That was one of those games that looked like might be ripe for an upset, but it was close for probably the first 15 minutes, and then Bama blew the doors off. Clemson, New Mexico, another popular upset pick, New Mexico over Clemson, and Clemson looked really solid in that game and then continued their way to the Sweet 16 for the first time in 6 or 7 years. Baylor was all over Colgate. Dayton, Nevada was a phenomenal game. Dayton was down big, I would say 17 or 18 in the second half, came back and won that game late. That was kind of a popular quote upset pick with 10 Nevada over 7 Dayton, but a heck of a game there. And then Arizona, despite a scrappy play early from Long Beach State, was all over Long Beach State. So going back to the top of the bracket, second round, Michigan State got off to as good a start as you could actually possibly imagine. The problem is now that I sit here in retrospect and I think back, we've had that probably smoke a few times from Michigan State and then watched it quickly smolder out. It's not the first time Michigan State's had a heck of a start where you're like, wow, they're going to go gangbusters. They're going to dominate this game. And it started with, you all know, or you all that are in my group text know what I call AJ. I won't say on the podcast, this is family friendly. With a lazy inbounds pass and a steal, and that was all she wrote. AJ Hoggard was 1 for 10. AJ Hoggard had 3 direct turnovers and probably 5 or 6 indirect turnovers that you want to call it hockey assist or whatever you want were attributable to him. Either bad passes that got blamed on somebody else. He was all in his teammates' grills when he would make mistakes. He was lazy on defense. He let his guy torch him. It quickly turned from looking really positive and fun, and we knew North Carolina was going to go on a run, make it a game, to Michigan State got blitzed, got exposed for what they had been all season when they played their worst. So as good as they played against Mississippi State and for the first 10 minutes against North Carolina, they played that poorly for the next not the whole next 30 minutes, because they actually came out pretty gangbusters early in the second half, got it to 2 a couple times, and then couldn't quite get over the hump. Sayonara to Malik Hall, phenomenal season for Michigan State. Sayonara to Tyson Walker, a great career for Michigan State and overall. I think over 2,000 points overall in his career. Pretty amazing. Both those guys will be missed. We'll get more into Michigan State and the state of state for what we got looking ahead. But disappointing. North Carolina, solid, very solid team. Shot the ball well. Some guys Michigan State picked their poison against and won. Sometimes some guys they just didn't guard as well and they didn't. And that's what happened in the tournament. If you don't show up to play the whole game, you're probably going to get picked off. And North Carolina looked a lot better than they had been when I've seen them, which was my impetus for picking Michigan State to pull an upset there, despite what I saw all season from Michigan State. So hats off to North Carolina for a good win there. Alabama GCU might have been one of the craziest, sloppiest, but yet most entertaining game of the tournament so far. Back and forth, physical, sloppy, kind of rough, Poor officiating, shocker. Most of those guys, at least two out of the three were common Big Ten refs. GCU just couldn't quite get over the hump. Alabama was down one of their key players. Alabama had guys foul out. Ultimately, Bama got the win as much as GCU was looking like potentially the biggest underdog to carry into the Sweet 16, which sets up in a heck of a matchup with North Carolina tonight. Could be super high scoring. Moving down, you had Clemson led wire to wire against Baylor. Baylor made a run. They missed a lot of free throws. And for as good as they looked in their first game, and as good as they had looked at times this year, they looked super sloppy and fell to the floor hard against Clemson. Kudos to Clemson. Once again, ACC doing great in this tournament. Big Ten, maybe take note. Study what they do with their schedule. Study what they do with their setup. Study what they do with their league setup, because while Purdue's got a shot and Illinois' got a shot, there's pretty good chance that neither of them is going to win the national title again. And the Big Ten still will date back to 2000 when Michigan State was the last team to win it. Maybe study the ACC, guys. Maybe study the ACC. Then you had Arizona on Dayton. That was actually a pretty good game, and then Arizona pulled away late. And again, we'll get to those picks for tonight here shortly. Moving over to the South, Houston all over Longwood. Anybody who's on TikTok and saw kind of the funny memes about Fairleigh Dickinson and Oral Roberts, and make some of those summations on your own. Longwood was a darling upset pick. That was never going to happen, and it certainly didn't happen against Houston. Houston looked phenomenal. Nebraska was a team that I thought it was a decent matchup for them. I knew Texas A&M would hit the glass hard. Texas A&M played nearly flawless and absolutely blitzed Nebraska in that game. And a nice win for them, and almost slid into the Sweet 16. Wisconsin, James Madison, that was my popular upset pick, and a very popular upset pick. JMU just muddied the water the entire game, dominated from tip to finish. Just Wisconsin could never get it going. They got it close, maybe even as close as tied, I want to say late, and just could not overcome, just took them, they put them out of sorts. They just didn't shoot the ball particularly well. Wisconsin already has had guys enter the transfer portal too, which is pretty interesting. Storr, maybe rumored to be heading to Illinois on $1 million NIL deal. What a joke that is. Third school in 3 years. And I believe not Klesmet, but the other shooter, name is escaping me right now. Very good chance he may end up at Michigan, who has a new coach. Anyway, James Madison, great win there. Duke Vermont was a scrappy game. Vermont was right in it and couldn't quite tip it at the end. Unfortunately, Duke won that. Moving down, NC State continued their run as I kind of predicted they would. Ryan predicted they would. Took out Texas Tech, played really well in the process. Best upset of the tournament by far. Most fun upset of the tournament by far, partially because they're a blue blood that people don't like. But Oakland over Kentucky. They had to numerous times in the broadcast say Oakland, located in Rochester, Michigan, because I'm sure a lot of people saw Oakland and thought, oh, that's a team from California. Nope, Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, really kind of formerly a Michigan State satellite school. Greg Campy, great friends with Tom Izzo, been coached there for 40 years, formerly a D2 program. How fitting that they were led by a former D2 player, a Hillsdale guy, Golke from Milwaukee, just blitzed Kentucky with 10 threes on 20 shots and 4 dribbles. It was just a thing of beauty. They looked so solid. Their inside game was good. Their point guard play was good. Kentucky just, whether it was because they're young, Oakland's a pretty seasoned, grizzled veterans team, veteran team, regardless of kind of how you look at how their, Kentucky's roster is made up. I mean, they're one, they lost a couple years ago, remember, to St. Peter's. They lost last year in the second round to Kansas State. Last year was the only win they've had in the first round of the tournament. And I think the last 4 or 5 years, I mean, they missed the tournament recently. It's not looking good, for Kentucky. Calipari's got a $33 million buyout. He's got a lifelong contract. Kentucky fans are pissed. Louisville fans bought Oakland t-shirts in droves. And Oakland was the fun Cinderella story there for a while, for sure. just really enjoyed watching it. Enjoyed kind of the way that their team plays. Just it was fun. It was good. It's one of those typical good stories. In the way that the tournament goes, where you get a 14 beating a 3. Hey, I've witnessed Michigan State lose as a 3 to a 14 in Weber State. Trey Townsend was another guy. The story, his dad's a photographer. Mom played at Oakland. His dad played at Oakland. His dad played for Campy. He's like a poor man's Malik Hall. I would take him out of the transfer portal for Michigan State in a second. And he really carried them in the next round. Going down to Florida, Colorado, epic game. Florida ties the game late. Colorado takes the lead, pretty much at the buzzer. A back and forth game where Florida kind of stormed back down a big guy who broke his leg in the SEC tournament. Nice win for Colorado there. Marquette in a close game early with Western Kentucky, and then they kind of walked. Going on to the next round there, Houston took out Texas A&M, and again, a game that got over way too late. I didn't even get to see it on Sunday night because I was long in bed. Texas A&M came from 12 down late, tied it up at the buzzer, put it in overtime. Houston eventually won. That was a slugfest watching that. Great game to watch. Duke blitzed James Madison, sadly. For as much as James Madison played great against Wisconsin and I think had a chance against Duke, Duke shot the ball well early and just put them to bed, and they just kept them at arm's length the whole game. NC State, unfortunately for some, and it didn't hurt my feelings that they won. I was certainly rooting for Oakland, but that was a great game. Went to overtime. Oakland had its chance at the end of regulation, could not pull it off. Often in those cases, the underdog kind of needs to get it done in regulation because experience and school size wins, if you will, in overtime. But NC State, so they're the lowest remaining seed at an 11. They've hardly been playing like an 11, though. So this is a pretty chalky Sweet 16. All the ones, all the twos, most of the threes, at least two of the threes. I'd have to look. I meant to look it up so somebody can text me. Chris, you text me. That's your homework. When's the last time all 4 ones, all 4 twos, and 2 of the 4 threes made the Sweet 16? I bet you it's been a while. Several years anyway would be my guess. Anyway, Duke kind of ended that James Madison run. NC State ended that Oakland run. And then Marquette, had a solid battle with Colorado and then pulled away in that game and took that game. Moving down to the Midwest, Purdue blitzed Grambling. Grambling kind of kept it tight for a little while, but, couldn't overcome. TCU got blitzed by Utah State, which was actually a pretty decent game, and then Utah State ran away with it. Gonzaga beat the other sweetheart pick, which is a 12-5, McNeese over Gonzaga. Gonzaga blitzed, absolutely trashed McNeese and looked like a legit Final Four team in the process. Samford got absolutely screwed by the officials against Kansas. I said rooting for all the cheaters to be knocked out of the tournament. There aren't too many left. Sampson at Houston's one of the few that's left now. But that was one that Samford got absolutely screwed in that game, and it was too bad. That was a popular upset pick as well. Would have been another darling pick. Oregon stayed hot, blitzed South Carolina. Creighton, really ran away from Akron. Texas actually was a surprise for me. I had Colorado State beating them, but Texas beat them and looked good in the process. And then Tennessee was all over St. Peter's. And then running it back, Tennessee-Texas was a solid game. Tennessee prevailed in the end and looked pretty good doing it. Creighton-Oregon was a double overtime game. Another fantastic game. I think followed the Oakland game that went to overtime. So Pittsburgh saw an overtime and a double overtime that night. That was a fun game to watch. And here a common theme too, transfers. Lots of transfers for teams doing really well. Tom Izzo, I'm talking to you. Listen up. Then fortunately Gonzaga absolutely destroyed Kansas as well. No more Dickinson, no more cheating self. It's good to get those guys out of the tournament. And then sadly Purdue crushed Utah State, got away with what they typically get away with, and I refuse to watch them. So let's put it at that. All right. So that gets us where we are today. We're in the Sweet 16. of what I would say has been an exciting tournament. It's definitely had some upsets. Doesn't feel like quite as upset heavy as it has been. As I typically am, I was about 50-50 on my upset picks. Kind of rare to not really have a Cinderella, because again, I'm not going to count NC State as a true Cinderella with the run they've been on to even get in the tournament. But there's them as an 11. I guess they're a Cinderella, but there's no Cinderella. There's no little school. There's no little guy. You got UConn, San Diego State. They were in the finals last year. You got Illinois, Iowa State. You got North Carolina, Bama. You got Clemson, Arizona. You got Tennessee, Creighton. You got Gonzaga, Purdue. You got Marquette, NC State, and you've got Duke, Houston. You've got all big-time programs for the most part, even if they play in a smaller conference like the WCC, like Gonzaga. They're a mainstay like Michigan State is, so you can't convince me that they're an underdog type. It's mostly Power Fives, in fact. UConn, Illinois, Iowa State, North Carolina, Bama, Clemson, Arizona, Tennessee, Creighton in the Big East. You can consider Power Five. Purdue, Marquette, NC State, Duke, Houston. So you got all big-time programs that are left. As far as the Sweet 16 goes, I'm sticking with my pick of UConn. I think UConn gets the win over San Diego State pretty handily. I think UConn got the toughest draw, but is also playing the best basketball. I picked Illinois to beat Iowa State. I still think that'll happen. It'll be interesting. Illinois very offensive-minded. Iowa State very defensive-minded. I think Illinois will win. And as I picked originally, I think UConn will beat Illinois in a close game to march on to the Final Four next weekend. Moving out of the West, North Carolina-Bama is a very intriguing game. I think North Carolina, who Michigan State did a really good job against on the glass, I think North Carolina can do enough on offense, and they play better defense, certainly, than Bama. Bama's a little dinged up right now. Wouldn't surprise me to see Bama win, but I think North Carolina wins that game. And then we got Clemson, Arizona. I picked Arizona originally over Baylor. I'm going to stick with Arizona. I think they're a solid team. And then I'm going to go with Arizona over UNC in what should be probably one of the better Elite Eight games to stick with my original pick of Arizona in the Final Four. Moving over to the South, you got Houston against Duke. Everybody in the world hopes Duke loses. Ryan shot me a great stat. Duke has not won as the lower seed in the Sweet 16 or beyond since 1994. They are the 4. Houston is the 1. I think Houston, every potential national champion gets an early scare and they wake up from it. I think that Houston got that from Texas A&M, and I think Houston gets this game against Duke, and probably it'll be a close game, but I'm going to go with Houston. I think NC State Marquette could be an awesome game. I love the way NC State's playing. It's hard to pick against them, but man, Marquette looked pretty dang good in the second half against Colorado. And I just think they're kind of hungry. They were hungry to get out of the first weekend for the first time in quite a while. First time for Shaka Smart since he was at VCU, so 2 jobs ago. And I think that Marquette gets the win over NC State. And then sticking with my original Elite Eight pick, I think Houston ekes one out against Marquette and marches on to Phoenix. Then going to the South, Purdue, Gonzaga. Originally I had Purdue over McNeese in this round. I like the way that Gonzaga is playing. I think they've got some bodies to throw at Edey. I think their lengths can give the guards problems. Maybe this is just because I'm so tired of Purdue and I'm so tired of Edey. And as much as they're a Big Ten team, I can't root for them. I'm going with Gonzaga over my original pick of Purdue. Creighton and Tennessee is going to be a heck of a game. I think it's a toss-up. I'm going to stick with Creighton only because I picked Creighton to get to the Final Four, and my Final Four is still alive. So I'm going to stick with that. And then I'm going to go Creighton over Tennessee, and then I'm going to go Creighton over Gonzaga in a really, really good game to keep my Final Four intact of UConn, Arizona, Houston, and Creighton. Let me know what you think, what you have. If you could do a redo, what would you have done? How did you do in the first few rounds of the tournament? How many games did you get right? Like I said, pretty popular number in our contest was, I'm going to look it up a second, pretty popular. Most people had in like the 30 to kind of 32 range, 33. The outliers were definitely 35, 36, 37, 40 being the most. So we had a 40, a 38, a 37, a couple 36s, and then couple 35s, and then from there it was on down the line. So, pool wise, upsets obviously mess with some brackets. As long as you can keep your Final Four intact, that's what matters, because the heavier points are given if you pick teams that stick around. That's the advice from Polo, is like, I might have done great in the first weekend, but let's see how I do when it comes to the Final Four and beyond. So it will be an interesting weekend of basketball, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and we shall see who comes out of the smoke and gets to the Final Four. All right, second spot. We got a lot of Mitch-a-Palooza sponsored mailbag again, which is awesome. We've got some great Chris mailbag questions. Ryan gave me some answers to Mitch's. I've got some of Chris's that I'll give you a shot at, Chris. So our typical 2 mailbag participants, we greatly appreciate it. Let's jump right in. Mitch says, which Spartan Hooper do you see making the biggest jump this offseason? My vote is Cohen Carr. So I'll first answer that, Mitch, that it was clearly Trey Holloman next year. I would not have seen that coming. I expect it for Carr. I think he's got all the athleticism. He's got all the energy. He's got all the right attitude, and I think aptitude. I would be surprised if it's not Carr. The only outlier I might say, this depends on how he really truly recovered. He's been warming up with the team, but we haven't really heard much at all about fears. I mean, look, he cracked his femur. Like, how can the stress of when can he take the true stress of basketball, and how will that hold up? Will there be long-term effects? I don't know. My vote, and Ryan said the same, was Carr. But my outlier is Fears, because I think if Fears can truly get healthy, and it's kind of a behind-the-scenes quiet thing, he was good already. I think if he can take his scoring game, his offensive game to the next level, he could be a Cassius Winston type of player. All right, second mailbag question from Mitch-a-Palooza. Aiden Childs will be the blank most entertaining quarterback in the Big Ten this year. I think there's a legitimate argument for number 1. Ryan says he's definitely top 3. Honestly, I didn't even go bother to look at the quarterbacks. I know we clearly had some turnover at quarterback in the Big Ten. Hard to argue, given the fact that I can't even tell you off the top of my head very many of the quarterbacks in the Big Ten. I mean, you got Penn State's, obviously. Ohio State will have, somebody gaming at the top. But I think he really could be entertaining, because he's a run-pass guy. I think the expectations will be kind of on the low simmer side for Michigan State, and I think he could kind of electrify things. Michigan State's going to get a lot of chances to make some headlines early in the season, because they got to play Oregon, they got to play Ohio State, they got to play Michigan. It's not an easy schedule. So I could go with that. I can go Childs. Ryan says top 3. Again, the fact that I couldn't tell you off the top of my head firm quarterback starters for the rest of the league. Now, football's been out of my head for a little while. That tells me that there's a very real opportunity that it could be Childs. All right, third one from Mitch-a-Palooza. What is your regular season prediction for the Tigers? I think they are a better team, but still have them under 500 with 77 wins. Man. Hey, like today, a 1-0 start on the road, a low hit shutout. That's promising. I really, honestly, I got to be honest, I don't know if the Tigers' strength is their pitching, is the Tigers' strength their youth and hitting. I know it felt like last year they had trouble sometimes scoring when they would have good pitching, and when they would get scoring, they couldn't pitch. Kind of the age-old conundrum, like the Michigan State conundrum. I'm going to go, I think that they can go an even 500. I think 81-81, and honestly, I think that's got an outlier chance to really contend in the Central. I know the Twins are going to be pretty good. The Royals could be decent, and is a pretty pedestrian, division. It just kind of depends. Do they go out and make a splashy trade maybe at some point in time if they're in contention? How have they kind of handled the roster? I don't know enough about it. And hey, if they do well, we'll talk about them more on the pod. So, Mitch, for you, I'm going to say that they're going to go 81-81. Ryan says he thinks they'll win 75 games. So he's got a little bit less than you. I guess I'm the optimist. Number 4, moving over to golf. Scotty is a plus 260 favorite in Houston this week. That's the lowest odds for a winner in recent memory. Most of them are typically plus 900 and up. Will he stay hot into Augusta or show some weakness and finish in the top 10? Look, it's hard to win on the tour, period, let alone week after week after week. Obviously, he won 2 in a row. He took last week off. After today, he's -5. He's 1 shot out of the lead. Look, if he loses, it's not going to be because he has some weakness. He played through an injury that, by his claim, he could barely swing the club and won at the TPC. It's hard to say that he's going to win. I think there's an above average, obviously by the odds, chance that he can win. I don't think it's a particularly smoking hot leaderboard here. Let's just take a look at it really quick. You got Taylor Moore at -6, Scotty Scheffler -5, Joel Highsmith, never even heard of him, Davis Riley at -5, Bo Hassler, another Texas guy, he's up there, Aaron Rye, Adam Svensson, Alejandro Tosti. Mackenzie Hughes has been playing really well. I think that he could challenge. He's up there at -4. Bunch of names that I've never even heard of as I go down the list. Garrett Higgo is the next name I recognize at -2. Cameron Davis -2. By the way, when is he ever going to win a tournament? Or no, that's not Cam. Is that Cam Davis? No, he's the Australian Cameron. Different Cameron. Peter Malnati, who obviously won last week, is right up there. Nick Dunlap, the rookie, he's right up there. There's not a ton of big names here. It's a Scotty type of tournament because it's in Houston. As the big name, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he wins. And I think if he loses, it's not because, the wheels fall off or that he shows some weakness. I mean, if there's a weakness in his game, it's arguably his putting. Maybe. I think he's going to go. I think he'll at least finish in the top 10 this week, and I think he's going to head into Augusta, and he's got to be the hands-on favorite. I mean, I know Rahm's played well. I know the Liv guys have played well. It's Scotty for me. I mean, there's nobody playing better in golf right now. And then Mitch's last question, what is a cooler golf shot? Love this question. A pure long iron stinger off the tee or a greenside flop over a bunker to inside 3 feet. All right, so I'm going to tell you what I think is the cooler looking shot. Then I'm going to tell you what is the shot that I can actually pull off myself. And by the way, because I forgot, Ryan says I think he'll stay hot but not necessarily win. So we kind of agreed. So Ryan says stinger. Mitch did not say what his answer is. I'm going to say what looks cool when I see it on TikToks and stuff is like that 1 or 2 iron stinger off the tee. I think there is no sexier shot in golf than that. There's no way in hell that I can pull that off. It would either be a complete shank or a peeler or I'd snap hook it. So I wish I could pull it off. I can't. So for me, the best shot I can do is the greenside flop to 3 feet. I have that decently in my arsenal, although Ryan's kind of up in his game over me on the short game lately. I got to get out and practice more this summer. I think the coolest looking one is the stinger. I think for me, the one that I can actually pull off is the greenside one. All right, moving on to Chris's questions. Next year's basketball team, Chris says, what's the floor for next year's basketball team, assuming no transfers in or out, which is a fair assumption, although Michigan State is on some transfers so far, apparently. I think they're going to have to bring somebody in with the guys coming in. Obviously, roster-wise, there's guys that are gone because their eligibility is expired. There's a couple guys that could come back that I think most Michigan State fans agree at least one of them we don't want back, maybe both. But if they're going to have no transfers in or out, I think the floor, I would agree. Chris said 8-9 seed in the tourney without bringing in a big man. I think that's the floor. I think if they do go get the right guy, they can develop the talent. They can rid themselves of some of the cancerous tissue that existed this year that a lot of people don't want to admit was there. A lot of people don't want to admit that AJ sucked because they just strictly look at his stats. They don't look at his overall game like I've been saying all year. I think Michigan State could be as good as like a 4 or 5 seed next year, and I think 8-9 is about right. I think that they're going to be probably better than they were this year, but how much better? I don't know. Can they shake the double-digit loss doldrums? I don't know. I think it'll all depend on the type of big man they get. I might argue if Mahdi stays, if Kohler stays, Cooper stays, which decent chance that all 3 guys stay, and Booker continues to evolve and can play the 4, And maybe, he can stretch the floor a little bit there, and you can kind of bring in a 3/another, where Booker can actually move to the 5 and play a little more like a small ball-ish outside. I think a wing 3-4 type of guy that can shoot and stretch the floor is more important to Michigan State next year than a big guy. That's just kind of where I am. Ryan did not answer on Chris's question, so you're just getting my take, Chris. Next Chris question was, what does Izzo and staff need to prioritize to get us to a 5 seed or better? Who is or might be in the portal that would be a good fit? I mentioned he's an outlier, Trey Townsend. He played obviously his whole career at Oakland. He's got grad transfer year left. He's a Malik, like a poor man's Malik Hall. Malik was 6'8", Townsend 6'6", but he plays 6'8". He's not a big stretch guy. He's probably a little bit more pack the paint guy, but he's a guy that can get you buckets in the paint against big guys. I would not mind at all to see that from Michigan State. Ryan shared today that we got a guy from Colorado that's looking at a bunch of schools, but Giovanni Hadley, another guy who's kind of a stretch type of player, had really nice numbers. Let's see here. I'm going to look it up here and I'll tell you real quick. 11.6 points, 6 rebounds, 2.4 assists, 41.7% from 3. He's a wing. That's a guy that can maybe stretch the floor. Michigan State needs a bigger wing. So I think really for me, Chris, with what's coming in, a couple decent guards coming in. Tang, he'll have an impact. Jace Richardson's probably a little bit more game ready. Some people will argue the opposite. I think Richardson's probably a little bit more game ready, assuming that all the guards come back and stay. I really think it's as a guy that can 3-4 stretch the floor a little bit, but drive to the basket, almost like an Aaron Henry type. And then they need a guy that either is a straight stretch 4, that can kind of then let the big guys just be what they are, and just give you fouls and give you some production, rebounds, whatever. I think Michigan State can be fine that way. They don't need a quote Edey or Dickinson or one of those type of guys. If the 3 guys all stay and they can be serviceable at center, I think that does it. You got this McCullough guy coming in who's, I think, a little bit more of a 4. He gives you a little bit more beef there too. I don't think Michigan State needs a true big man. I think they need a good size wing and a shooting stretch 4. And I think then with everybody, let's assume everybody else comes back, you lose one cancer and AJ Matty maybe comes back, maybe doesn't. I think Michigan State could definitely get into that kind of 3 discussion and maybe kind of come from the bottom up and be a surprise as opposed to a negative surprise like they were this year. So that's kind of how I would look at that. Let's see here. Chris had another question. So another question from Chris is, the Masters is around the corner. Who are you thinking could contend? Do the live players continue their strong play in the majors? I mean, you got to look at it. Like Rahm is a gamer for majors in big-time play. Brooks is a big-time guy. DeChambeau has won majors before. I mean, Dustin's won them. They got plenty of guys that can do it. So I think there will certainly be guys in the mix. Scotty's got to be the hands-on favorite, I think, even though Rahm's the defender to win the Masters. We'll talk more about the Masters in a couple weeks. But just part of the problem is I don't know because I don't watch the CW to watch live. I'm not intrigued enough to watch the crappy product that they have. So it's really hard to predict how is that going to look and how is that going to stretch. So, and then Chris's last question was, for a spring practice update, what are you hearing? Who's stepping up? Who's most likely to transfer in the spring portal? Great question. I think we're going to push that one to next week, Chris, and I'm going to let Ryan weigh in a little bit more there. By all accounts, I'm definitely hearing Childs is stepping up as the leader. I'm hearing that his offensive line is looking pretty solid. I think that he's got some guys that are really ready and hungry to put last year behind them. But we'll save that question for next week. And then one last question from Chris today, a great one. I kind of touched on it a little bit for the pod. Does Fears ever fully recover? Will he be the same player as before the shooting? Do we have a plan B other than Holloman? I think, Chris, the transfer portal is going to tell us everything that we need to know there. Right now, I don't think we have another option. I mean, I think Tang can play a little bit of the 1, but he's more of a 2. Holloman's, definitely is a one that can play some two, and it's he and Fears to be the main guys. By all accounts, Fears is going to fully recover and not have a problem. But I think what we'll be telling is, does Michigan State go into the portal and grab an upperclassman point guard? If so, that will be a little bit of smoke that there's something going on and that Fears might not be quite ready, which would be a shame, because I think if he is ready, I think he's going to be a phenomenal player for Michigan State for the next couple of years. I think he's a great leader. I think he's a great defender. I think he's a great distributor. If he can up his game on offense, like I said, I think he could be the most improved player from Mitch's question. So it'll be super interesting to see what he has to say. So that is Mailbag Hodgepodge. Lots of great questions this week. Man, I'm cranking along 45 minutes into the podcast all by myself. Moving to third quarter, state of state. I talked about this a little bit. Let's just give kind of a quick overview. I think, let's look at it. Michigan State's basketball season was a failure. Mitch asked the question, what's the expectation? What's the bottom line? What's the, what is a failure if you don't get there? We didn't say national title or bust because that's hard to do. We, Ryan and I both said Final Four or bust. Michigan State didn't come close to that. I think they had it in them to maybe make a late run, but clearly something was amiss this season. That was very clearly to me and evidence in the last game, A.J. Hoggard. I do not want him back. I've kind of gone on the record and said I really refuse to watch Michigan State basketball if he comes back. You can at me if you're a basketball fan and tell me AJ wasn't the problem. AJ was the problem. AJ didn't play defense. AJ wasn't a leader. AJ griped at his teammates. Did he make some big plays at certain times? Sure. He was really good against Illinois in the win. He made some good plays against Mississippi State. But the problem is his bad way outweighs the good and is way more common than the good. And if he comes back, that is a burden on Michigan State, and Michigan State is going to have another middling season. If he goes away, assuming Fears can come back healthy and assuming Akins comes back and some of these other guys come back, the freshmen infiltrate in, Carr gets better, Booker gets bigger and better, I think Michigan State could have a much higher ceiling actually in retrospect next year than they did this year. Look, was it disappointing the way they went out in the tournament? Yes. Was it fun to see them actually click and put it together in the first round? Yes. Was it disappointing to see a Tyson Walker? He, as Ryan pointed out in a tweet, he's the Drew Stanton of Michigan State basketball. Great player, great stats, doesn't really have anything to show for it. Yep, disappointing. Same for Malik Hall, great Spartan player, a lot of heart, could have kind of shriveled when he played like crap against Northwestern early this year and stepped up and delivered for his senior season and probably carried Michigan State to the tournament. Mady Sissoko kind of woke up late in the season. Cooper was what he was, got better, needs to get better yet. Kohler, wouldn't surprise me if he leaves. How much did the injury hurt? Should he have redshirted? Chris asked that again. Absolutely, he should have redshirted. It did Michigan State no good to have him play. They did not win games because of him. Probably they lost games because of him, and it cost him the season of eligibility. What kind of player will Norman be? Sounds like he's got the right attitude. I think it's kind of going to be interesting that there's a lot more intrigue going into next year than there was this year. I think Izzo is going to keep his mouth shut when it comes to lauding his team. Maybe he was doing that to try to pull them in and get them fired up. Maybe he saw something and that's why he did that, because that frankly was out of character for him to pump his guys up as much as he did before the season. I think Michigan State is going to come into the season not ranked, and I think that they're going to have a pretty good season. The Big Ten loses quite a bit in the fact that Purdue's not going to have Edey anymore. Yes, they have other nice pieces and parts, but when you lose a guy that can just camp in the paint and is a double-double machine, it's hard to replace. Illinois is going to lose an awful lot, although it sounds like they're throwing money to get more back. So Illinois will probably be a player in the game. Purdue will be decent. I think Ohio State will probably be good next year. I don't think Michigan's going to be any better. Indiana might be decent. Indiana, I just saw, got a good 5-star forward recruit that Michigan State was after. So maybe it all is not dead in Indiana after all, although in my opinion, they need shooters. So it'll be super interesting. It was a disappointing season for Michigan State. I think Izzo's got some soul searching to do. I think he realizes that. I also think he's hungry to kind of push this behind him and finish his career strong. So we'll see. Big rumor that Mark Montgomery goes to U of D. Does he kind of shake up the staff a little bit? I kind of think he needs to. I think he needs some fresh blood. I think he needs some new mindset. I still think he should go get Drew Valentine and say, Drew, come be on my staff for a couple of years, and then I'm going to give you the reins. And then in a year or two announce that Drew Valentine is going to take over Michigan State. In my ideal world, that's what they do. Moving on to State of the State from football. Like I said, spring football started. I don't know a ton that's going on right now. I'll commit to we'll address that a little bit more next week based on Chris's question. And then to keep us kind of on track, final State of the State. Good luck, Michigan State hockey. Play, I believe, tomorrow against Western Michigan. They're the number 1 seed. The number 2 seed in their bracket is North Dakota playing number 3 Michigan. The Michigan State-Michigan Big Ten championship game was epic. Freshman defenseman with a slap shot from the blue line to win that game in overtime. Michigan State got down early, kind of came back, took a little bit of lead. Michigan tied it. It was a classic. That game 7, next goal wins mentality. Fluky stuff happens in these tournaments because it's a one and done. If you have a cold goaltender or the other team has a hot goaltender or whatever, things can happen. But I think Michigan they're built to maybe make a run. Let's see if they can get to the Frozen Four. So excited for that for the Michigan State Spartan hockey team. Good to see them win a championship again for the first time in a while. Now a word from our presenting sponsor. Team Anders Realty will help you find the home that fits your wants and needs, and they make the process simple and fun along the way. The Anders have served thousands of clients for 30 plus years in the West Michigan area and are here to serve you today. Learn more at teamanders.com. All right, I had to get a sip of water there. It's a lot harder to do this when you're flying solo. Golf, we'll keep it quick. Talked a little bit about Scotty in the mailbag question. Just dominant. I thought last weekend at the Valspar, it was a fun tournament to watch. It was so interesting. You had JT right up there, and then on Friday, end of the day Friday, and then he shits the bed. I think he was 8 over on Saturday. Just absolute train wreck. You had Kashmir Keith, Eagles on the last hole, goes something like 4 under on the snake pit, the last 3 holes, which is unheard of. One of the best stretches ever. Shoots into the lead. He shoots 6 over on Sunday and falls off the face of the earth. You had a good battle between some rookies. You had Peter Malnati, plays with the yellow ball, the bucket hat, the unconventional look, the look that you would tease on, plays the yellow ball because his son thought the white ball was boring. Wins for the first time in over 8 years, super emotional. And the interview was really moving to watch. And this is why it doesn't matter to me if there's tons and tons of star power, because there's always a good story week after week. The guy just was grinding it out for years, finds a way to finally win, and it's a life changer, right? He's in his mid-late 30s. He got a big win. He's got a lot of exemptions coming. He can get into the majors. He can, gets into some of the big money events, the no-cut events. It's a life changer, when these guys win and guys that grind and haven't won in a while. Cameron Young is the one that I was thinking of that. Oh, so close again. I think I can't remember if it's something like 10 more around there. Runner-up finishes without a win so far. I think he tied a record. He was runner-up again in this one. He's so close, good player. Nothing wrong with finishing second. That's pretty damn good money, but he wants to get the win because of exemptions and stuff. We got the Houston this week. We've got another week, and then you got the Masters. So we're going to ramp up our golf chat. Ryan and I will hopefully start to play more. He played in Charleston and played some great courses a couple weeks ago. There were golfers out today. I worked from home, and there were golfers out in our yard today, so it must have been pretty decent out. Honestly, been buried in the basement, catching up on work and doing the podcast, so I haven't really ventured out. But, typical spring weather in West Michigan, 55 one day, 40 the next, snow one day, sunny the next. So we shall see. But golf should be a fun little run here. Now that we got April, May, June, July, we got the majors, then you got the Olympics in there. So we got a lot of good golf to talk about as well. All right, moving on to sprint. First time in a long time that I've come up with the sprint questions. And it's just going to be me on the sprint. So I'm going to ask myself the question. Best remaining coach in the NCAA tournament. You got to go with Danny Hurley. Some people might argue Kelvin Sampson. Yes, he's a great coach. That team reminds me of old Michigan State. Dude's a cheater. I can't go with him as the best remaining coach. Best remaining mascot in the NCAA. There's a lot of dogs out there. There's a lot of bulldogs. There's huskies. There's, all sorts of dog type of animals, I got to go with the Cyclones. I think especially in the spring, not that we want tornadoes to be ripping up any cities, but the Cyclone is a pretty fierce mascot, although technically the mascot, the actual character, is a cardinal or some sort of a red bird. I really don't get that. Why wouldn't you have somebody dressed up as a tornado? But whatever. Third spot in the sprint, Michigan coaching hire. Rate it. I'm going to say it was a double. I use a little bit of baseball analogy. I think it was good. It was better than a single. Not the best. I mean, I think obviously he made a great run with FAU to the Final Four last year, but then he had the whole same cast of characters, albeit in a new conference, and just kind of disappointed this year. There's some rumors of some guys that are going to transfer in if they're eligible to go to Michigan. We know that that's been a problem in the past with some guys that could have been game changers for them. I think he's a good coach. I think he's a pretty safe hire. Much like Ohio State hiring Diebler, I think is a good hire for them. They're both football schools, although Michigan's going to struggle for football. They just had a brand new D-line coach got fired or resigned before he even coached a spring ball. They're football schools, but Ohio State's on the up and up for football. Michigan, not so much. I think it was a good safe hire. I was honestly kind of surprised. I thought it'd be Dutcher from San Diego State, but maybe they're kind of realizing they want to push away from that kind of that bad era, that Fab Five era that really is wiped off the board for a reason. Who knows? We'll see. Can't get much worse than it was this year. We'll say that. And the last one, this is a controversial one and a tough one that I came up for myself. What's a better show, Seinfeld or Curb Your Enthusiasm? I have a really hard time picking, to be honest. I mean, there's so many classic Seinfelds. I've certainly not watched through, Curbs 2, 3, 4, 12, 15, 30 times like I have Seinfeld. But I will tell you this. I'm going to answer it the safe way. If you have not watched Curb Your Enthusiasm, do yourself a favor and watch it. And then rate the characters. And that's where I'm going to say, I'll go on a limb and say Curb's a little bit better than Seinfeld, because as much as I love Kramer, there is not a supporting character as good as Leon. Bar none. Period. All right, look at that. I got it done in just under an hour, flying solo. I'm parched. I'm going to go watch some basketball. I think we're probably pretty far into the first half of the first game, maybe even tipped off in the second game. So we'll leave you with this quote from Homer Rice. You can motivate by fear and you can motivate by reward, but both these methods are only temporary. The only lasting thing is self-motivation.